Scotia is the main person in this, but a subtitle, Lost Sister of Tutankhamun. Obviously, she is not particularly well known in that role, and some people might even say, "Well, is that the case? Was she Tutankhamun's sister?" And I would say, yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back.
Hey everybody.
I'm Logan.
And I'm Nicole.
And this is Generation X Paranormal. So today we've got someone that we've spoken to before. Mm-hmm. We have Luke Eastwood on, and we're really excited to talk to him, but what can you tell us about Luke?
So Luke was on for our Samhain episode. It was really great, and you should go back and listen to it if you haven't. He had wrote a book about that, but he's back because he has authored a new book. Yeah. So he is an author. He's a practicing druid, and he lives in Ireland. But we're here to speak to him today about his new book, Scotia, the Lost Sister of Tutankhamun.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of that stuff, so I'm super excited to talk to him about this.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, can't wait.
Yeah, so let's talk to Luke.
Let's do it. Well, hey, Luke, how you doing?
Hi. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, for sure. No, we're excited to have you back. I'll be honest with you, it was probably really one of our better received videos in a while. For the folks who don't, for folks who don't know, we had Luke on for Samhain, and kind of explaining the origins of Samhain and what we call Halloween. But yeah, it was very well.
I can use that opportunity to flash my book up and plug it one more time. There you go.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Perfect.
Check it out. It's awesome.
That. There you go. That's what it's called.
Absolutely. Yeah, when we had a blast. And I think for our audience, they're always really intrigued because, granted, we do have a pretty good worldwide audience, but, obviously the majority of it is here in the States. So they're not always quite as in tune with, some of the other views, some of the other traditions, especially like a druid tradition. They're not typically that attuned to it, although they celebrate all of it and they don't realize it. But
true.
But yeah, it was fantastic. And we have you on because obviously you had asked to come back because you got a book coming, and we saw. I'll be honest with you, I'm not as familiar with it. I know of it, but it's extremely interesting. But anyway, for those who haven't listened to the first episode or watched the first episode, if you could kind of just give us a real quick breeze over yourself, so those who don't know and haven't watched the other show, kind of give us a quick little information about Luke.
Okay, well, I guess I'm originally from northeast Scotland. I moved away when I was a kid down to England, and I lived there till I was 29. I worked in America very briefly I was about 6 months in America, went traveling around back to London. I spent 10 years in London altogether. And then I moved to Ireland with my then wife, who's Irish. Anyway, so I've just ended up staying here ever since, and this is my home now. So I've been here for nearly 26 years, I think. So when I had started into this whole druid thing back in London, but I suppose most of that learning process has been here in Ireland. So, that's pretty much what I'm steeped in this sort of Irish version of neo-druidism, I suppose. Right. I call it neo-druidism because it's like we are different from the original druids, of course, because there's this long period of time. I mean, paganism kind of disappeared and reappeared. So I think it's important to distinguish between the two, because
Absolutely.
it's changed. I mean, even Christianity has changed enormously.
Dramatically, yeah.
And like Judaism's changed an awful lot from when it first started, and various other religions. I actually went to Turkey, and there's some really ancient chapels in this, I can't remember the place where it is now, the name escapes me, but these kind of strange volcanic hills, and they're easily carved. So it's soft rocks. So they made all these chapels and built, buildings in the rock. And some of the earliest Christian churches there, where they painted the ceilings and stuff, and the iconography and everything is just so different from now.
Oh, sure.
Right.
You get in a modern church, so in like whatever, they're like 200 AD. So 1800 years later, you've got something that's completely and utterly different from the early church. And I think it's the same with all the paganism, the different forms of paganism. They're not the same as what it would have been back in the day,
Right.
Right.
And I'm kind of fascinated with, say we're talking about where things come from. It's a general thing. And I suppose since I was a kid, someone say this is that and it's like that, and I'd be like, oh, why is it like that, and where did that come from? And quite often people are like, oh, just shut up, I don't know, or stop asking difficult questions.
Right. Well, yeah, so many people are they hate challenge. They hate to be challenged for their views, and I think it puts some people off. And I think that's really kind of a travesty, because you don't learn from those things, And,
No, not at all.
Yeah, but especially when it comes to, and you had mentioned, kind of the transition of how certain religions have become more, either they've adopted some new views, some different feelings about certain things. I think you would have to do that as a religion in order to be able to be. I mean, you'd have to be with the times. You'd have to know that the people who are trying to follow a religion have to understand it, and if they don't, and it doesn't adapt to them, then you really don't have anything. So whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know. I'm not a theologian, so whatever is their thing. But I think if you don't adapt to it, I mean, it's just going to probably be one of those things where it turns into an ancient practice that is no longer used.
Yeah, that can be the case. I mean, I think there's two cases there, really. Either you become like fossilized and sort of like incredibly authoritarian and theocratic, and there are religions like where there's just total rigidity and there's no room for change. Right. And or you're going to go the other way, where it morphs over time. It's going to adapt. It's going to change. Obviously, if you don't have core values that remains the same, then it would be a bit ridiculous. It'd be a bit of pathetic religion if it doesn't stick to its principles. But the practice, the way it's expressed, and whatever, societies change, people change, and there's an evolution in human behavior, consciousness, social behavior, whatever. So, of course, it's bound to happen that religious practices will change over time.
Absolutely.
If they're allowed to, if that's what people want, and they are permitted to change things a little bit, then it will inevitably change.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you get labeled potentially a heretic, which kind of rolls really well into what we're going to be talking about today. So let's talk about the book. I'm going to let you go ahead and run with it, but kind of give us
here, which I can show you if you want to have a quick look. There, holding right there. You go.
Awesome.
So
I like it. Yeah.
As you can see, Scotia is the main person in this, but a subtitle, Lost Sister of Tutankhamun. Obviously, she is not particularly well known in that role, and some people might even say, well, is that the case? Was she Tutankhamun's sister? And I would say, yeah, absolutely. But then, everyone has their own take on this. Egyptologists and archaeologists disagree about various things. And I suppose it all goes back to Akhenaten, the heretic king, the monotheist Egyptian pharaoh. And like he had 6 daughters. So what you can be pretty sure of is one of these 6. And by like process of elimination and various bits of evidence, I think is a really strong case. It's the oldest daughter, Meritaten, who is Scotia. And for a long time, people accepted this story as genuine. And then you got into like the 20th century, very late sort of 19th century into the 20th century, and you go, oh no, this is all a load of rubbish. It's just a story. It's just, mythology. But then what's happened since then is there's been a load of archaeological evidence, there's been a load of DNA evidence, etc., which has then kind of swung it back the other way by going, wait a minute, this is like really incredible, this evidence. And you stack up all the evidence together of, proof that the Egyptians did travel a long way, that they made it to the UK, that their artifacts are in Ireland. And I think one of the, there's various burials which show links with the Egyptian pharaohs. In fact, there's a general DNA link across Europe, which you'll find is a connection to the Egyptian dynasties. And the strongest you'll find is right on the west. I think Spain is pretty strong, and in Ireland and Britain, it's like the most extreme connection. So that's pretty bizarre. So there's, without going through the entire book, I could list off every single thing that points towards this. But what I've kind of done is it's like a detective story where you're kind of following all these clues to point to the end thing, which is this woman called Scotia, who's in all these stories, is buried in an obscure part of Ireland in the far west, at the very beginning of what's called the Dingle Peninsula. In the bottom of a mountain range called Slieve Mish, there's these 2 graves there. And one is, by legend, they haven't ever exhumed them. One is her, and the one next to it, which is a bit less fancy, is her horse. And the story, there was this massive battle between what's come to be called the Malaysians, the Gaels, against the people who were already there, who were in charge. It's the Tuatha De Danann, the people of Darna, the goddess Darna, and or Danu or Anu, and they actually won that battle against the Tuatha De Danann, and they eventually kind of beat them all together. But she apparently fell from her horse and died, and the horse died too. And if the sort of foothills of those mountains where she's buried, you can see it's not flat. It's not like super mountainous, but it's sort of getting into the mountainous terrain, and there's rocks everywhere and very undulating ground. So I can imagine that you could easily be thrown from your horse, or the horse could stumble, break a leg or whatever, and you're like, bang, and you're dead. And that happens all the time. Even today, people have horse accidents, and I actually knew someone that happened to, that they were killed in a horse accident.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. I didn't really know her really personally, but but so just as an example that this kind of stuff still happens to this day, that people are killed in accidents riding horses. And that's not in the middle of a battle. That's just like, riding your horse,
Absolutely.
So,
uneven ground and rocks and everything. I could see where that could happen.
I'm curious too, because if she obviously coming from Egypt, unless you go to some of the very far ends of Egypt, they don't have as much rock. I mean, obviously if you're like which I know is not Egypt per se, but there are some places like, I'm trying to think where, maybe Jordan or something like that, where they have a lot of rock and a lot of things like that. But other than that, I think as far as Egypt's concerned, there isn't a ton of that type of topograph.
Is that part of Ireland? Like I know certain it can be kind of boggy. The ground can be kind of boggy.
Yeah,
and wet
it's very,
and
very rocky. The west of Ireland has got a lot of mountainous areas. In fact, the tallest peak in Ireland is in Kerry, which is, our graves in Kerry. The whole area is quite mountainous, Actually, going back what you said about Egypt, right? What happened was Akhenaten moved his capital to a place called it's like the Armana, the area. It's called. I think he called the capital Akhetaten. Anyway, actually, all around there on the east bank of the Nile, it is all rocky there. Behind that, there is a big load of rocks, and that's where they built the tombs and stuff, and they got most of the rock to build the city from that area. But you're generally right. There are little bits of pieces in Egypt where there's a big load of rock, and then there's like just plains and sand and whatever, But it's not. There isn't vast stretches of mountain or like in Egypt. It's a very kind of mostly fairly flat country, really, I suppose.
Yeah, unfortunately, my only experience with Egypt was going through the Suez Canal, and from that side, there is no mountains anywhere. So that's about the most I've had.
Can you see very much on the canal, or are you like too low down to see anything?
Well, first of all, I was in an aircraft carrier, so we could see everything, and you see quite a bit, and it's everything that I guess, what you classically think of seeing something in Egypt, very sandy, very desert, very arid. But what's interesting is you do see in little spots green things growing, which I thought was just so weird. But, of course, we're next to water. But I just find that really interesting that you kind of have that little bit of like oasis thought to yourself about, oh, wow, you could see where that would make sense. But no, for the most part, from what you can see in the Suez, however you want to pronounce it, on an aircraft carrier, which is 9 stories from the water line. Yeah, you could see quite a bit.
Yeah, that would make sense. It's pretty tall, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's gorgeous. It's really cool going through there. Unfortunately, the way I went through there, we were kind of a sitting target. So unfortunately, my view came while I was holding a weapon, which is not any way I'd want to visit a country. But still, it was interesting. But I guess kind of going back to this, I absolutely don't want you to give away the farm, because I have a feeling this is going to be something people are going to want to read right away. With that sort of person coming to, ancient Ireland in that area, what do you think, or were there any changes in how people were, or maybe did it change architecture? Do you think it changed any way that the folks that were there that first got to meet her on through history, was there any impact to that?
Well, it's really hard to know, because for a start, the Gaels or Gaelic people would have been considered foreigners themselves at that time. They were coming from Spain, and sort of her entourage and the people she was with, generally, the story's called the Sons of Mill, and another place her husband's called Gaethos, possibly came from Scythia, which is sort of Ukraine, Russia area today. So it's really hard to know exactly, but it would seem that she was rescued by somebody, and it's hard to know exactly who they were. There's certainly very ancient letter where somebody, it's because of the way they did their names, it's not very obvious who was writing. A woman who was like a pharaoh's wife wrote this letter asking to be rescued, and there's this ancient record written in cuneiform, which was that's the Sumerian Babylonian script, which was still in use for international stuff, like English would be today. That would be the international language of the time, before Greek became the international language, and then after that was Latin, and then it became I suppose probably Spanish for a while and then English. But in this old tablet, she's like, help, I'm really in trouble. Can someone come rescue me and get me out of here? You know? Mm-hmm. So there may have been more letters like that, but there's only one that's on record. So she was rescued and fled. So the people that she fled with, we don't know for sure, but she may have had an entourage with her from Egypt and maybe managed to organize like a whole bunch of her supporters. And, she may have had like I imagine that they had some kind of imperial guard, whatever. There would have been servants, etc. They'd have got on ships. Certainly the Egyptians had seagoing ships.
Oh, yeah.
It could have been the Phoenicians or somebody like that took her away. We don't really know for sure. So she would have arrived into Spain with this group of people. They didn't stay there that long. They had to leave. Things didn't go very well in Spain. And so they ended up coming to Ireland. So they basically came as an invasion force. Now, her name like reverberates through Irish history and Scottish history, but so she's an enormous legacy, but herself, she may have died almost immediately. We don't know how long she was in Ireland before she died. She could have been here like 2 days.
Right.
You know, we don't know exactly how long after they got here that battle took. There were incursions. There was certainly, there's one of the sons of Mill called who came here and then went back to Spain. And I think when he came back, he got killed somehow. He was the first person to get killed of their party, I think. And so there was a exploratory trip here, and then they decided to come, and then they tried to invade, and then they had to fight the Tuatha people, and there was this huge thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of this sort of Druid guy called Emergin. He's like the chief Druid guy. There's this famous poem, the Song of Emergin, which is all about how they managed to, essentially then she did a deal with the three goddesses of Ireland that, if they promised to sort of like worship them and remember them forever, then they'd be able to come here and to defeat the Tuatha, and they'd have the blessings of the land, blessings of the gods, if you will. So this all happened around that time. So it doesn't tell you exactly the time frame, whether you're talking about days, weeks, or a few months, how long this went on for. But anyway, in this one of the early battles, she gets killed, right? She's already got some children, but it's not like in big detail about all that. But her descendants went on to become like the modern Irish Gaels. And then her descendants also went to Scotland. And then there's a whole load of mythology around that. Well, that's where Scotland comes from. The name comes from her name.
I did not know that.
That's what I'd heard that before.
Screw
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and you always wonder.
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So she may have actually literally been in Ireland for like a couple of days, even actually on the land, because obviously they spent a good bit of time trying to get into Ireland and failing and having to like retreat in their boats, and so. Yeah. We don't really know how long she actually spent in Ireland, but we do know that she did come here and that she died and was buried here. So her personally, how much of a influence she had on anything, you just don't know. I mean, if she was only here for, say, a week and died, then it's really more her legacy, her memory, rather than her personally that would have she wouldn't have had much of a chance to have any influence on anybody. If you arrive in and you're dead in a week, that's not very long, is it? To sort of
no,
not at all.
What I think is kind of really, and again, if you explore more of this in the book, I apologize, but okay, so maybe not her, but if her legacy and her ancestry, obviously so much that they named the entire country of Scotland.
I know, it's crazy.
Just the fact that it's interesting to find out if there is much Egyptian influence in some of the things that are currently in belief structure, or just in anything, things that current Irish, current Scottish folks do within relation to Egypt. I think about just as simple as like architecture, and those are the things that, granted, I'm not a student of this, but you would think that the things that typically other cultures adapt from cultures that have come, you see it a lot in architecture, you see it a lot in music, you see it in the things that that are more expressionary. So I'm curious, just how much of that is got some influence. I certainly don't know, but it's amazing to me, having never heard about this. In fact, I did not know that Scotland was named after, which makes 100% perfect sense now. But yeah.
That's a really difficult question to answer, what you've just said, because if you think about the more ancient Irish culture, it really revolves around the number 3 a hell of a lot. The cosmology and the ideas of earlier, certainly the sort of the pre-Druidic culture, and sort of, you can definitely say there's a sort of cosmological model of like life and the universe and how things are constructed. Revolves around 3 and 9. And then you've got later on, you start to see number 4 come into like theology and, cosmology and metaphysics. And I suppose what you call the occult now, So this whole thing was called Hermeticism, which, in Hermeticism, you've got four directions and 4 elements. Okay, that all comes from ancient Egypt. So you could say that migrated to like Western countries, so gradually through various different forms, through the Romans and the Greeks, and then later on through the Renaissance. But then there's also a school of thought that think that was already introduced to Ireland, quite possibly through the Egyptians, and they seem to be certainly. There were certainly contacts in places like Gaul between the Druids and the Greeks, and it would seem there was a lot of trade between the Eastern Mediterranean and Britain, and also Ireland, mostly for metals, really, for tin and copper and things like that, and amber coming all the way from Norway, even ends up in like places like Israel and Egypt.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's quite possible there would have been some sort of like cults or religious schools that have had an influence on Irish culture, because you've got like the 4 directions, you've got the provinces, the 5 provinces, like compass points, the one in the middle. So we don't really know the date that this kind of information, this kind of way of thinking, the 4-fold model instead of the 3-fold model, actually hit Ireland. We don't know when that became a thing, really. So some people say, oh, it's medieval, but, it could be much earlier than that. We really don't know. When you get into things being written down in the sort of Christian period, the Christians were already affected very much by the sort of Neoplatonic, Hermetic model of how things are, coming from Rome and Greece and Egypt, where it started. So, if it got here earlier by the Egyptians, how would you possibly know? You're not going to be able to actually tell. All I can say is it's possible, but I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
That's one of the greatest things.
The great mystery.
Right. The question mark is always what drives you. Yeah. It's great. Aside from the fact that it's just it's an amazing accounting and just having that knowledge, what kind of made you want to write the book?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things, really. Various people I ran into who had mentioned Scotia, And then I remember I read Magnus Magnuson's book about Scotland. It's just called Scotland, actually, I think, which is a massive book. And he mentions her in that. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. And then when I moved to the Dingle area, which is a long time ago now, God, that must be getting on that was maybe about 10 years ago, more or less. Yeah, there was mention about this place, Scotia's grave and that. And then I got a job in Tralee, and the quickest way to get there was to drive past the monument for Scotia. So I saw it every single day on the way to work, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I think maybe I need to go and visit this place. Actually, I think I'd already been there once at that point, and then I thought, gosh, I'd go back again. And I thought this was very interesting. But then I wrote the guy I co-wrote Kerry Folktales with, he'd written a version of that story, very short for that book. And I read it and I thought, So, yeah, well, I think I'd like to do my own version. So when I did Dingle Folk Tales, I revisited it and just did another sort of, the mythological version from the Irish text. I kind of just modernized a bit, and some of these old books, they're really tough going. You get the story, but then there's like 10 pages of like genealogy, son of Y, son of blah blah blah, did this and did that and blah blah blah, and then you've got all this extra stuff in it that has no relation to the story, and it's like really hard going. So you strip out all that stuff and then reconstruct the story to tell the same story, but without all the gumph in it that's really just irrelevant. So that's what I did with this in Dingle Folk Tales book. And then I thought, hey, maybe this just kept coming up over again and over with people talking about it, or I saw videos coming up, and I thought, right, not many people have actually done a real kind of investigation into this. There's like only a couple of people that have actually done a thorough book about this. Lorraine Evans had done a book, and an American guy called Ralph Ellis. But fair play to him doing this, but I thought his book was so speculative. It was just way too much speculation for my liking.
Sure.
So I thought, right, I'd go back and I'll find all the historical records from Egypt, and I had help with that. Quite a few archaeologists have helped me out with some of that part of it. Again, in Spain, I had some help from people who are experts in that area. And, I'm familiar with all the Irish texts. I've got all those anyway, so I just went and looked them all up, all the references there that I could find. And the Scottish stuff, I got the original Scottish texts. And just went through it with a fine-tooth comb, like you would be if you were a detective trying to find out what happened to somebody.
Right.
And then from that, I just chronologically constructed the whole story, going through from her father through to her death, and then, describe a bit about the legacy she's had, the effect she's had on modern-day Ireland and Scotland as well. That's the end of the book. But most of the book is that story from her father, what happened to him, and what created the whole situation in the first place. Because, his father, Akhenaten's father, was kind of normal. Amenhotep the third, when Akhenaten was first king or pharaoh, he was Amenhotep the fourth. And then he changed his name to Akhenaten, and because of the Arten is like his god. It's like the first monotheistic religion, probably, because Judaism was around, but Judaism didn't have it had a female and a male god really originally. At that point, maybe it had become purely just Yahweh. I'm not really sure, but because that's changed. Judaism's changed an awful lot from the really early days through to the modern day at various points. So, at what point it became sort of a more familiar worship of just Yahweh. Because I mean, they acknowledge the existence of Elohim means the gods. It doesn't mean one God. So they chose Yahweh out of many gods to be their God. Whereas Akhenaten decided there wasn't anybody else. It was just the Arten, and that is God. And it's like a solar symbol. So I go into all that in the book. But anyway, so you've got to bear in mind, there's this whole pantheon of Egyptian gods and the priests of Amun-Ra, and they're like the dudes. They're like, we're in charge here. And he comes along and he says, right, okay, you're all fired. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Yeah. I just, just thinking about that, just a little bit of knowledge that I have versus, monotheistic thoughts and polytheistic thoughts. First of all, they couldn't be any further from being, there's no normalcy between that. So to have those two clash together would just, well, that's where wars come from.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's just, that's wild. Did you find that kind of removing the exposition, that you had mentioned where you just kind of go through the whole genealogical background, did you find that kind of removing that from there, were you able to get more of that real data that some of the other predecessors that you had mentioned that didn't get to it?
Well, I think it's just the volume of stuff that I had looked through, really. It's not so much if you look at the actual stories, I got the same stuff pretty much as what other people got out of it. But there's just like more things that I found that were kind of reinforcing the story, because a lot of people have neglected Spain in the story because of Spanish language. I had some help and everything with that. Because I can't speak Spanish, but I got a little bit of help. And you go, oh, well, that's really interesting. That ties in really well. And the only person who really looked at Spain, as far as I can see, was Lorraine Evans, and her work's been helpful in that respect. And there's some Spanish professors that have been and a Spanish author I know who lives in Scotland. Called Ness Bush. She's been very helpful as well. So, I pulled in favors from people, help in the areas where I knew I was weak, that I would struggle with the Egypt stuff and the Spanish stuff. I thought, well, I need to do this right. I need someone who's more expert in that to help me to get the right bits, and then I can put it all together. Yeah. So I pulled from loads of different strands all together, and it kind of, all these things just reinforce the whole story, really. When you look at it all together, the conventional wisdom really was the Egyptians were like very advanced, but they didn't really go anywhere. They didn't do a whole lot. They just had wars locally, and that was the end of it. And then eventually they got, taken over by the Greeks. And then the Romans were there, and then that was the end of it. It was part of the Byzantine Empire, and then the Muslim Empire, and there you go. But the reality is they actually did make ocean-going vessels, and they did go out of the Mediterranean.
Absolutely.
And they did explore places, and so did a lot of the ancient peoples, like the Mycenaeans and the Phoenicians, sailing up into northern Europe and down around the coast of Africa and things like that.
Absolutely.
So this stuff is all just ignored to a large extent. It's like, I mean, I saw a documentary about the the Chinese fleets. Oh my gosh, incredible! Like the biggest ships in the world at the time, long before Columbus, much bigger, like 6 times the size of Columbus's ships. They circumnavigated the world before the Europeans did. They said that story's just not told. It's like people, they've got this really narrow focus. This is how it is, and anything that doesn't fit, they just actually literally ignore it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Even though there might be 100% irrefutable evidence that X happened, they go, well, no, X never happened because it ruins my theory. A and B is ruined by the existence of X. So we're just going to pretend that never happened. We're going to ignore it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that going on with this story, I think.
Yeah.
The story of Scotia, because it's very inconvenient. If it's true, it really kind of messes up a lot of orthodox historical thinking, you know?
Right. And that's okay because that's a true history. My favorite thing here in the States is, we grew up in elementary school. Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? Our whole childhood, that's what we're told until we get to college and then forget everything you were told.
Yeah.
It's not true. These people were here before, these people were here before, and these people, I mean, it's crazy that they do that. I don't understand what the purpose is.
I mean, there's so much wrong there because I watched Graham Hancock's program and these guys, and they find these footprints of humans going back, 28,000 years ago. And what about the Vikings,
Absolutely.
Right.
They were there like 500 years before the Chinese even, and they were there before Columbus.
Yes,
and so it's like a whole bunch of people that were there before Columbus.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of it is what you said. Anytime you kind of move and shift paradigm, it disrupts. And people just can't deal with that disruption, which is unfortunate because I think a lot of stuff gets lost. And you had mentioned they had these great sea-bearing ships. Well, in my personal opinion, and I've known this for a while, that the Egyptian influence can be kind of traced kind of around the world of a lot of things that Egyptians have brought in. And it always makes me laugh. I'm like, okay, well, hold on a second. If we're all going to agree for just a second, which I do believe, I don't think the aliens built the pyramids. I love ufology. I'm a UFO person, but they didn't build the pyramids. We know that. So if we're all going to agree that the Egyptian people built these amazing pyramids and built the Sphinx and built all these amazing monuments, that they couldn't build a ship?
I know.
I mean, call me dumb, but you would think if these people are that good that in fact, they even believe that they got some of that stuff going through the Nile to get some of that stuff where it needed to be. So if they can move these enormous, gigantic blocks, they couldn't build a ship that could go across the sea is just asimine to me.
Well, it's whoever's writing the history. That's what it is. Whoever has the most power at the time writes the history and covers the rest of it up. Yeah. That's what happens.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a lot like many areas of life where, there's an orthodoxy that everyone's supposed to accept. And then whoever's brave enough to challenge that is going to get absolutely slapped down.
Yeah.
You can see it in medicine, all kinds of science, in archaeology. Even in art, like some guy comes along and he ends up chopping off his ear and he's eating his own paints. And then 100 years later, he's the most famous, loved artist in the entire world.
Absolutely.
Everyone's going, oh my God. And then you can buy mugs with sunflowers on and all that. And, I've been to the museum there in Amsterdam, and it's absolutely full of people. It's just totally full of people the whole day, all day long, every day, all year round. And yet, in his own lifetime, everyone's going, what's this shit? This is a load of crap. He never sold one painting in his whole life.
He was destitute.
Everyone's looking at his work and going, what are you on? You must be mad.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was a lot to say about that. And he was so destitute that, of course he wasn't appreciated in those times.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, I mean, that's just a silly example of this way of looking at things.
Sure.
When you really want to push the envelope and just go, hey, how about doing this differently and this, or maybe we're wrong about that. People really resist it. Like the first guy to come up with the idea of hygiene, I forget his name. It's a really long, difficult name. I think he was Hungarian. He ended up in a mental asylum for suggesting that people wash their hands. They told him he was an idiot and all his theories were wrong and convinced him that he was nuts. and he got put in he died in a mental asylum, and he was so right. And now he's like, recognized as a pioneer of medicine and hygiene, all this stuff. But in his own time, they locked him up.
Yeah.
And he died in a mental institution. It's like, that's so tragic. Like, but you've got this same thinking. Obviously, there's crazy ideas, and like people got these mad theories about, the Great Pyramids, a nuclear reactor or something. You're like, that stuff's all insane. But like,
it is.
But the whole thing of, I think it's better to allow people to be a bit nuts and just put those ideas out there, even if they're crazy, rather than to just say, no one can think differently. No one can challenge this. No one can disagree. And you're just shut down straight away. Obviously, if you apply logic, the more wacko theories, you're going to realize that they don't work and it's crazy.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you kind of just have to like blanket ban everything from being challenged, which is what a lot of these people in academia or whatever, on the mainstream, they just shoot down everything.
Well, I think that, and I know it's not just in the States. I've, been in the military. I've had the luxury of going all over the world. So it isn't just an American thought process, but we all seem to suffer from an all or nothing problem. So it's either you digest it in whole and kind of, whether it's through dogmatic thinking that you have to accept it all, or the fact that you can't look at something in pieces and realize, okay, I don't know how on board I am with X, but I can totally back this particular part. And I think that is one of the fallacies of human existence, that, okay, granted, we're a show about paranormal, which has nothing to do with it. But, I think that's where we run into problems, because in order to have true innovation and in order to be able to do those sort of things, you need to be able to disrupt. And if you can't disrupt, then there is no innovation. If you are so scared in your dogmatic ways that if somebody comes along that has some kind of different, okay, we'll even say political. We don't do politics on the show, but I'm just going to say it. Even on a political basis, if you're not on one side and you're on another side, all the great things that have ever happened, even politically, have happened from people that are like, okay, this dude might be nuts, but hang on a second. Look at X, X, and X. That makes perfect sense. Do I buy all these other things? Certainly not. But can we look at some of this and adapt to it? It happens in technology. It happens in everything. That the true innovators have always been the people that are capable of being able to get outside of the box and still be able to talk to the masses.
Yeah. I mean, you look at electricity and you look at like the TV, the radio, all these things. If you said, well, if you're going back far enough and you say, hey, I've got this idea, I'm going to make this little box and maybe it can have a picture in it of me, and then you can be somewhere else and this stuff will fly through the air and go to the other box and you'll be able to see me. And they go, right, go get the key and put this guy in the loony bin and lock him in and throw the key away on this guy.
Right.
But that's like John Logie Baird, Scottish inventor. He made the first TV, I mean, he thought I was going to be an educational tool, but it didn't really turn out.
Missed the mark on that one a little.
Like how he thought it would.
Right.
Well, we perverse the crap out of that. I mean, you give humanity anything that allow them to sit and do jack shit for hours, they're going to perverse it somehow. They're going to do something to it that's not good.
Yeah. But it's just like, that's kind of also, it would seem like magic to people back in the day to say that's not possible. That's not. There's so many things about the world, about existence, about our own selves, even that we don't understand. We're only really getting to understand now some of this stuff about how the mind works, the brain, whatever, the sort of things like ESP, etc., which people have been like, you either got to be burned as a heretic or you're crazy or whatever. And now we see like, oh gosh, both the Russians and the Americans spent like billions on investigating all this stuff. So if I was a load of hokum, then why would they spend like, 20 billion on investigating sort of remote viewing or something? You
Oh
know,
yeah,
it
the men that
sets a
stare
lot
at
of
goats.
rubbish, you know. So a lot of stuff they don't want to publicly admit about things being actually the way they are. They actually do know certain things are true. I mean, again, with the oil of archaeology, these people who are great authorities, sometimes they know that something's true, but they're just not going to admit it because it's not convenient. And you've got that throughout history where I think probably since we became like civilized people, I suppose, where, you know, if it didn't suit your agenda and you thought it might affect your money or your power or your influence, you just quietly just move that out into the corner where no one can see it and just hope everyone forgets. And people do forget about stuff, actually.
Yeah, they do.
It's amazing how quickly, if you just shunt something into the corner, you know, look at Göbekli Tepe, you know, that only really became a mainstream thing, was it in the last 5-10 years, really?
Yeah.
That guy discovered that like 1987 or something.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's crazy.
So crazy.
Yeah, Professor Smith. It's like he's dead now, of course, but like look how long it took to make it through to public consciousness.
It's only when it's palatable for them at the time. That's all it comes down to.
Yeah.
But, well, listen, writing the book, let me go back to the book for just a second, because I think, honestly, Luke, you, myself, and Nicole could probably have a show for, you know, years on all this stuff that we feel about this stuff. But as far as the book itself, was there kind of, obviously, so we're kind of getting towards the end here. Is there something that you discovered kind of in the, I don't know, in the journey? Because I've often talked to people, you know, of course, we talk to a lot of authors, but we've talked to a lot of authors that say that writing is cathartic and it always opens up either new questions or answers questions. Was there something from this particular book that kind of gave you that, oh shit, or that, oh my gosh, you know, I did not expect that? Was there anything, or was there more than one?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. Well, first, there was the whole thing about the, you know, the voyages, because like I had, you know, the orthodoxy was like the Egyptians built the first like proper boats, but they only used them to go up and down the Nile, like you said, and transport stuff. So the orthodoxy is, they didn't go out very far. They were bad sailors. And, well, I mean, in a military perspective, they weren't really very good. You know, as a navy, that's true. But like, you know, merchant shipping and being like a warships are two different things, aren't they? You know? So, you know, you don't have to be like a brilliant, I don't know, who was a brilliant tactician on the water, I don't know, but you wouldn't have to be like this amazing admiral type to be able to go off to another country.
For us to be like Admiral Halsey or somebody like that.
Yeah, you just need a seagoing vessel. It doesn't have to be full of weapons. You're just going off to get stuff and come back. Obviously, probably back in the day, you'd want to have a few people with, you know, some kind of weapons in case you got attacked.
Yeah.
But so that was all a fallacy. I used to believe that orthodoxy, and then going through all the research and the book, and you know, the replicas of the Egyptian boats were built in the late 60s and stuff. That's all detailed in the book. I'm just like, oh my God, it's amazing. So they weren't the only people who were building like ships that were seagoing. Like I said before, the Mycenaeans and the the guys from Carthage and all that. What they're called again? Anyway, I forget the name. There's a whole bunch of different peoples from that time who were building sophisticated boats, but it was the Egyptians, it seems, that came up with the first like really sophisticated boats. And before then, the Mesopotamians were building boats, really kind of not very complex ones. But like, you know, it was the Egyptians who perfected like the wooden slatted boats, you know, that were planking. That was the Egyptians who come up with all that.
Wow.
So it seems a bit stupid that they wouldn't bother. They go, oh, we've just invented this amazing like new type of boat, but we won't bother to use it. We'll just go down the Nile, like, you know.
It makes perfect sense.
Just look at it.
yeah, just sit here and look at our lovely creation. We won't bother to go anywhere in it. You know,
It's just so funny.
It's just so ridiculous. Like,
It really is. It's
the other thing I came across was something at Scotty's grave, which was when you go, people actually make a mistake quite often. They look at this big rock with the mostly graffiti on it. That's where the Om symbol would have been, the Om writing, which is gone because probably been dissolved by time. But the actual graves are a little bit further up from this big rock, so not everyone goes to the right place. But in the center, there's one central rock, which is about, you think in feet, do you? Feet rather than centimeters. So It's probably about maybe 2 foot by 2 foot, or a little bit smaller than that, maybe. So in normal weather, you can't see it. But when it's really heavy rain, and I've been there many times and been there in the pouring rain, really pouring rain, you got, what's those funny marks? It's got these strange lines and stuff on it. And I'm like, that's really weird. So I took a bunch of photographs, and then, I've gone into that in the book, the analysis of what this is. This is not random. This is being done by somebody. Somebody has carved these lines and shapes into this rock in the middle of what's supposed to be a grave. And some people say, oh, no, it's not a grave. It's just a bunch of stones, and somebody just put them there for no good reason. So, I mean, people tend to not put in loads of effort to, like, get a big load of stones and put a big stone in the middle and a ring around them, and then bother to carve stuff on the stone for absolutely no reason at all. Like, maybe we're just like, I'm a bit bored today.
Let's just do this.
Let's just make some random thing in the middle of nowhere.
Especially at that time, because getting rock and getting all that there at that particular time, it's not like they had an excavator. They couldn't just put it there.
The rocks might just be locally gathered, and they may have been hastily done, but like obviously it was done for some reason, not just for like out of boredom or like, people, like you say, people don't just do stuff like that for fanciful reasons. I mean, life was hard, time was valuable. People didn't just do stuff for, in a sort of frivolous way like they might do now.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
absolutely. Everything.
So that was quite shocking, and it would be good if someone were to go back there and do like proper analysis with likes of X-rays or some other
like
kind
LiDAR.
of
like ground penetrating.
LiDAR. Yeah.
And maybe someone should go and dig up the grave and excavate it properly and find if there is a body underneath there, because they have got Tutankhamun's body, they've got Akhenaten's body. I think they might even have Nefertiti's body.
They believe so now, yes.
Yeah. And like, if there's someone buried there and they can do a DNA test and go, hey, hang on, this person is directly related to Tutankhamun. That's Tutankhamun's sister. That's Akhenaten's daughter. That's Nefertiti's daughter.
Right.
And if they could do that, they go, wow, then this story is 100% irrefutably true.
That's true.
So, but I mean, no one's really interested to go there at the moment. It is a difficult place to get to. You're going to go through a load of mud and cross these little tiny bridges, which are just narrow enough for one person. It's not an easy place to get to. And like, you really need some Wellington boots or big hiking boots, because you're going to be up to your ears in mud. You know, if you go any other time that's not like being dry for a week or two, it's like pretty. It's not like a fun walk. It's a bit tough going. But when you get there, but I mean, so maybe part of it is like not wanting to have to try and lug all this gear down there and have to helicopter in like a load of stuff or whatever, because it isn't accessible by car or truck or anything like that.
Wow.
So I think that might be something to do with it as well.
Sure.
Well, maybe your book will inspire a future archaeologist to want to find out. Yeah.
And I would imagine
be so happy if, even if they said, no, you're wrong, but it'd be nice to know if I am wrong. Well, yeah, fair play. I want to know the truth, regardless of whether it's my version or someone else's. Absolutely. I'd like to know, is there anyone buried there? And if so, who are they?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's the challenge. Prove me wrong.
Exactly. I don't mind being wrong, but tell me why.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Luke, listen, I know that
I'm excited to read it.
I'm excited to read it. And I know we don't know exactly when it comes out, but when it does, we'll absolutely update our listeners.
It is out in March, but I haven't got the exact date for you right this moment.
Sure.
So it's sort of like very soon, but but I'll make sure to let you know the exact date of publication anyway.
Yep, and we'll definitely let everybody know that.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I every time you come and talk to us, it's amazing. So
I learned so much.
I do learn a lot, and it was an absolute.
I really
honor.
enjoyed it. It's been, as you say here, it's good crack. But I mean, obviously, I have to be careful with that word. It has different meaning, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, good crack here in the U.S. can mean a lot of different things, but I get where you're going.
Yeah, we know the meaning.
We get the intent. Yeah. But well, listen, thanks again for coming on. We had a great time, and hope to get you back on soon.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me back, and I really enjoyed it, and I'd love to come on again, maybe when I have another one. That will be a little while, though. It took me 3 years of work to do this book, Jeez,
yeah, for sure.
I can imagine so. That's a lot of research to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks, Luke, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks a million. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Luke, for coming back on.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. It was good talking to you again.
Yeah, it was a good time. Was this show potentially paranormal? Not in the traditional sense, I'll give you that. But the mystery behind it is very paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it just in the sense that, like he was talking about them traveling, going on the open sea, which I clearly believe they did.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the spiritual ties of Egypt kind of coincide, I think, with a lot of the pagan and druid and all those things go together. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to actually read the book and see what he actually talks about. Obviously, we couldn't spoil it.
No.
We want everyone to read it, and I want to read it. So I'm excited to see that. But and I had heard previously about Scotia.
I hadn't.
So it is interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting. Yes.
And I think that the namesake of Scotland comes from that.
I know.
I mean, it's just.
And from someone that wasn't alive very long,
I know.
It's so crazy how that stuff happens.
Which again tells me there had to have been a ton of influence.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more than we know.
Yeah.
But to find the evidence of it, like he was saying, it's very difficult. So, but I'm so interested in reading about his research because he seems to be one of the first ones to really dive into it. So.
Yeah, he had mentioned there had been some others, but he's kind of gotten more into the weeds, so to speak.
Yeah,
so.
So very, very cool.
Yeah, listen, guys, tell us what you think. Check out the book, and we're happy you joined us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, we'll make sure and put the links to the book in the episode notes. We don't, as of this moment, know what date it's coming out, but we'll make sure and put all that on our Facebook page, show notes, and everywhere that we share the video. So make sure and click on it, buy his book, reach out to him. He's very, easy to talk to.
Super approachable.
Yes. So reach out with questions because I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about them.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well,
see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Generation X Paranormal. Remember, all editing is done in-house and we're a self-funded podcast, so your support truly makes a difference. Like, subscribe, and follow us on all socials to stay connected. Special thanks to Eric Cooley for creating our music. And don't forget to check out our Patreon for exclusive content and ways to help us keep the show going. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the unexplained.